Which anime has what it takes to be the best dark fantasy of the new generation? Sentenced to be a Hero and Clevatess are great candidates for the title, but one of them might be fooling you. Between heroism as an eternal punishment and a legendary beast that defeats any hero, both deliver violence in fantastic worlds, but their differences make it clear which one has the potential to become a giant and which is wasting its potential. So the truth is, one of them is absolute cinema and the other a huge disappointment. But do you know which is which? If you like good fantasy anime and have a solid sense of humor, drop a like and get ready for this dark fantasy showdown. Seibaa! In both of these anime, heroes aren't exactly well regarded at the start of the stories. On one side, Sentenced to be a Hero treats them as the worst kind of criminals, people who committed atrocious acts and are now forced to fight for humanity, all in the Suicide Squad style. That is, if the characters from DC could be resurrected over and over again. Man, imagine them bringing back Jared Leto's Joker every single time. Meanwhile, the heroic group in Clevatess fails in its mission to defeat the titular character, which results in the destruction of an entire kingdom and ruining the heroes' reputation in the eyes of their people. Even the king lost his head over the situation. But keeping that in mind, it's worth noting how different the narrative structures of these stories are. Clevatess shows a magical beast stopping its genocide because it was won over by a baby's cuteness. Oh, and from there follows a very linear story that mainly follows one group, while also giving glimpses of other perspectives to better contextualize what's happening. Sentenced to be a Hero, on the other hand, really focuses on the main group of heroes and is clearly divided into arcs that showcase their deadly missions. In each arc, we see a bigger narrative being built in the background and the introduction of new cycles. I mean, eccentric heroes that shed light on a fundamental factor in comparing this anime, their characters. In the anime about the Condemned, the main cast is larger and full of exaggerated personalities, including a guy with quicker hands than Puss in Boots, a psychopath, and a dude who's only slightly less horny for dragons than Donkey from Shrek. But we need to highlight three figures: Kivia, the captain of a night order who is prejudiced against the heroes; Eurita, the group's mascot slash goddess who cosplays as Gilgamesh in her free time; and finally, Xylo, the grumpy protagonist. Looking at the other series, its core is much smaller, consisting of Clevatess, the king of magical beasts in the form of a horny human; Alicia, a resurrected heroine who breakdances; and the babysitter of the kingdom's cutest prince. Oh, When it comes to the rest of the cast, the characters introduced live their own stories but end up crossing paths with the protagonists as enemies, allies, or something in between. And this is practically never seen in the other anime, since it stays focused on the hero's mission, something that limits our worldview and makes the different approaches to the universe very clear. Sentenced to be a Hero spends more time in the same locations, exploring the culture of a place and learning about what makes that environment unique. This includes things like runes that modify equipment, a demonic plague that threatens humanity, or goddesses who distort reality just to get some head pats. It works more or less like this. Good girl. And when we talk about Clevatess, the vastness of the land is made explicit from the beginning, but there are still mysteries to be unraveled about it and the chance to see different communities.
Man, burn down the village.
Plus, we get to know the ore that serves as the basis of magic, as well as the legends and powerful beings that seem to rule the fate of this story. It's also worth mentioning how characters often break into expository monologues to enrich the lore. Fortunately, the series uses lots of visuals to help with these explanations, and doesn't let it disrupt the flow of the story most of the time. The same can't be said for Sentence, which has fewer explanations, but when they do appear, they feel much less organic. A big part of this happens because it focuses heavily on action, and is based on a light novel rather than a manga, like Clevatess. So now it's finally time to go into more detail about both anime and definitely decide which one is more promise than payoff. One positive point for both series is their visuals. Clevatess has a retro 90s look, while the other follows a style similar to Mushoku Tensei, largely because both anime have similar production themes. This already makes them much more pleasant to look at than any generic fantasy. But when it comes to animation, the Magical Beast anime is just good and considerably below Sentenced to be a Hero, which flaunts technical quality at every turn. Maybe that's the bare minimum needed to handle so many boring action scenes. What? Okay, saying all of them are boring would be an exaggeration. The real problem lies in the way Xylo fights and the opponents he faces. Things start off interesting when we're introduced to the demonic plague as a force of nature and the protagonist's explosive knives that would make Michael Bay proud. But soon he gets help from a goddess and his fights are reduced to blowing something up or using a sword pulled from... where exactly?
What are you talking about? Of course it was for my ass.
Clevatess has very few real fights. To make up for it, its clashes can be resolved with more creativity and narrative weight, because we get more opponents with actual personalities instead of a horde of monsters with bad AI. That doesn't mean Sentenced to be a Hero doesn't have humanoid villains. They start appearing closer to the end of the first season, but when an epic fight is about to start,
2 seconds later.
It ends way too quickly and it's pretty disappointing. The only positive is the hope for a future with better antagonists. On the other hand, it's fair to say that Clevatess' final fight could have been more epic if it had better animation, and it still has the problem of the villain who stops fighting to deliver speeches.
Stop being fools who believe in the legend of the heroes. The true path to follow is to leave a like on this video, hype the content and subscribe so we can hit 200 subs.
Thinking about it, maybe his speeches aren't that bad after all. Back to the anime, Sentenced to be a Hero often doesn't make the most of its action, and whenever Xylo is on screen, it feels like things are going to be solved like this. Demonic Plague? Explosion. Bandits? Explosion. Little Ant? Explosion. His own bride? For some reason, he'd rather wander around with a lolly than get close to her. Jokes aside, what helps Clevatess' fights is that they aren't just about completing a mission. Each one serves the narrative and the characters. One moment, you're watching Alicia's development as she seeks to avenge her father. The next, you want to save a baby who's key to the fate of this universe. And we can't forget the boldness needed to throw yourself off a cliff without a water bucket. By the way, that scene helps show the brutality present in Clevatess, which does justice to its title of dark fantasy not only with that, but also with the judgment of humanity or the representation of slavery without feeling forced. Sentenced to be a Hero, on the other hand, puts the world's organizations on trial and condemns humanity through a relentless enemy. But when it comes to brutality, while the heroine in Clevatess is key thanks to her bizarre regeneration ability, the main hero of Sentence keeps getting in the way with his explosions. They may be pretty little lights to look at, but they make everything feel less visceral. It's only when other characters contribute that the brutality can truly be seen. So besides having more interesting personalities than Xylo, the other heroes are essential for adding variety to the action. If we compare them to Clevatess' supporting cast, they basically don't exist. At most we can talk about the antagonist and one other hero who are still pretty basic characters for now. Thankfully, the main group is well developed, which cannot be said of Sentenced to be a Hero, where most characters aren't explored that much. At best, we can say that Kivia stopped being prejudiced against the heroes, and Xylo became a little less annoying with Teorita. That last one, by the way, has barely changed since the beginning of the show, so it's up to you whether you think she's a cute girl who deserves head pats or an annoying brat who should receive the protagonist's VIP treatment. Explosion. On the other side, Alicia shows her own arc, and Clevatess has started to change thanks to those around him. But just the fact that he's a beast without humanity trying to understand his environment already makes him much more interesting to follow. Another curious thing is that both series had extended first episodes that clearly shows their strengths and weaknesses. In Clevatess, the story begins with exposition about the land and its legends, but it also introduces Alicia as its protagonist, hinting at her upcoming development. After that, the animation does its job of showing the magical elements of the universe and then continues the events that kick off the narrative, all with plenty of violence and unpredictability thanks to the king of magical beasts. Meanwhile, Sentenced to be a Hero flaunts its technical quality right from the get-go, then explains its concepts in a very unnatural way and moves onto a big action sequence. We do get one or two small pauses for some chit-chat and cool powers being shown, but the whole thing feels more like a game of fighting monster hordes. It's only at the very end that we get a glimpse of the protagonist's revenge, a narrative thread that's barely addressed for the rest of the season. So Clevatess isn't perfect, but it's the first chapter of an epic story. It doesn't have very inspired supporting characters or the most hyped animation, but it works well with its main group, leaving you intrigued to learn more about the vast world we've just started to explore. On the other hand, Sentenced to be a Hero feels like it's throwing you straight into the climax of a story that didn't have the necessary build-up for that moment to actually matter. It grabs your attention with flash animation and varied characters, but the action becomes repetitive and the cast is underdeveloped, largely thanks to the uninspired protagonist. The universe has creative ideas, but they never come together into a truly engaging plot. The potential stays more in our heads than on the screen. That's why Sentenced to be a Hero is today's disappointment, while Clevatess is the absolute cinema of this video and one of the most promising names in dark fantasy, which is kind of unexpected when it has such a cute baby, right? Oh, kuch. Explosion. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. With that said, thanks so much for watching. I'm Sid from the Seibaa TV channel and I'll see you in the next video.